Greetings, my name is Dele Fagbemio. I am a scholar, Olorisha of over 30 years, and Lukumi Babaláwo for nearly 23 years. Today, I want to share with you my work on sacred archives, specifically a case study of the Iroko Historical Society's efforts with the private library of Babaláwo Irete Obara in Havana. This talk is called Spirits in the Archive, Reclaiming Sacred Space and Ancestral Memory in Africana Religions. At the heart of this project is one guiding question. How can archival practice preserve sacred knowledge in ways that honor its spiritual integrity rather than reducing it to objects or data? The concern is not just with safeguarding information, but with protecting ritual presence, ancestral authority, and the sovereignty of Africana communities. Why does this matter? Because Africana religious archives are not neutral collections. They emerge from histories of displacement, survival, and reinvention. In contexts where African religions were criminalized or driven underground, secrecy and ritual stewardship were strategies of survival. To preserve these archives today is to resist erasure and affirm cultural continuity. As Diane Stewart has argued, safeguarding sacred knowledge is both cultural preservation and a radical act of survival. This project will contribute in three ways. First, it will reframe the archive as a living vessel of spirit and memory, not just a storehouse. Second, it will propose a spiritual ethic of archival practice that integrates ritual accountability with technical care. And third, it will demonstrate how community-based preservation can resist extractive models and instead affirm sovereignty and self-determination. Historically, sacred archives in the African Diaspora were maintained in bodies, in ritual performance, librettas, and in objects like sacred drums. Scholars like Robert Ferris Thompson have shown how cultural forms traveled and adapted, carrying deep histories across the Atlantic. These archives of sound, movement, and ritual were as authoritative as any manuscript. To understand sacred preservation, we must see archives as embodied and living. Diasporic examples of sacred archives are everywhere, and they take many different forms. In Havana, Babaláwo and Irete continue to recite and teach Odu verses, passing them orally while also inscribing them into private notebooks. In Haiti, Voodoo temples preserve songs, prayers, and ritual texts within the community, often held in sacred notebooks that serve as both teaching tools and vessels of ancestral presence. In Palo tradition, bundles of earth, sticks, and reliquary are not only ritual items but also containers of ancestral presence, storing memory in ways that defy Western archival categories. In Espiritismo, handwritten notebooks document conversations with the dead, recording spiritual lineages alongside prayers and healing instructions. What ties these examples together is that they are not static deposits of knowledge, but active, relational, and spiritually charged. They remind us that preservation is never neutral. It is both sacred and social, a matter of ritual practice and community responsibility. And they show that archives in the African diaspora must be understood as living vessels where memory, spirit, and material converge. Theoretically, I draw from African religious epistemologies and critical archival studies. Michelle Caswell and Marika Sifor describe radical empathy in the archives, centering care, accountability, and community consent. Linda Tuhiwai Smith speaks of research through respect, a principle that prioritizes community needs over academic extraction. And Africana theorists remind us that archives are not just repositories but also sites of refusal, survival, and world-making. The case study at the center of this project is the private library of Babaláwo Irete Obara in Havana. This collection holds ritual texts, annotated Odu, letters, and manuscripts preserved across decades. It is maintained under strict protocols. Materials can only be handled after ritual preparation, and some texts are restricted to certain initiatory levels. The Iroko Historical Society is working with this library under his guidance. Our role is not to take ownership, but to design digitization practices that serve the community and honor ritual boundaries. Some materials will eventually be accessible publicly, others only to initiates, and still others will be fully restricted. The point is not maximum access, but spiritually accountable stewardship. Methodologically, this involves 3 steps. First, careful digitization using non-invasive techniques, ensuring the physical integrity of fragile manuscripts. Second, metadata creation rooted in both archival standards and sacred categories, so that description reflects ritual significance. And third, tiered access. Some digital files are open, some encrypted, some kept completely offline. These distinctions arise not from secrecy for its own sake, but from respect for the spiritual agency of the materials. So what do I expect to find? 3 outcomes seem to stand out. 1, that sacred archives challenge colonial memory systems by refusing full transparency. 2, that spiritual stewardship can model new approaches to archival ethics, practices rooted in sovereignty, ritual accountability, and care. And 3, that preserving these archives is itself a form of cultural resistance and activism, ensuring survival across generations. What does this mean more broadly? It means that preservation is not neutral. To digitize a sacred library is not simply a technical act, it is a spiritual responsibility. It means that archives can be sacred spaces where ancestors and living communities meet, where knowledge circulates under spiritual authority. And it means that archival work, when guided by ritual ethics, becomes an act of healing, reclamation, and resistance. In closing, Spirits in the Archives invites us to rethink what preservation means in Africana religious context. It calls us to honor archives not as objects to be mined, but as living vessels of ancestral presence. It challenges us to develop practices that are accountable to communities and to the spirits themselves. And it affirms that by protecting sacred memory, we sustain not only the past, but the future of our religions. Looking ahead, the Iroko Historical Society will continue developing selective digitization workflows, building multilingual metadata frameworks, and exploring community-centered platforms like Omeka S. But the most important next step is ongoing consultation with elders, priests, and community members to ensure that every decision is spiritually grounded, that the future of sacred archives depends not just on technology, but on trust and ritual accountability. So now I want to close quickly, briefly with gratitude to the elders and teachers who have trusted me with this work, to my Oluwo CYU for his guidance, and to the sacred communities in Havana, New Orleans, Okap, Salvador, and beyond who make this possible. Finally, a quick shout out to all the institutions that have helped me grow over the years or have been so generous as to let me share my work. And we're excited. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there in person. Emergency in my house that necessitates me staying home and dealing with the aftermath. But I wish you all the best. I wish you all a great conference, and thanks again for allowing me to share my work.